So now I'm good to go. It's very good to see all of you. So we'll do the kind of opening of the meeting now. Thank you for being here for the TLC's professional development event this week. Today we'll be having a teaching chat. We'll talk to you a little bit more about what that means, give you some announcements and things. But before we get to that, we're going to begin with a land acknowledgement.
I'm going to share my screen and hopefully bring the audio with me. Oh, that's not what I want to do. False alarm, false alarm. Okay. Are you seeing a video in full screen now? Yes? Okay.
Yes.
All right, let's see if I brought the audio with me or not.
As the first land-grant institution established under the 1862 Morrill Act, we acknowledge that the state of Kansas is, historically, home to many native nations, including the Kaw, Osage, and Pawnee, among others. Furthermore, Kansas is the current home to 4 federally recognized native nations: the Prairie Band Potawatomi, the Kickapoo Tribe of Kansas, the Iowa Tribe of Kansas and Nebraska, and the Sac and Fox Nation of Missouri in Kansas and Nebraska.
Many native nations utilized the western plains of Kansas as their hunting grounds, and others, such as the Delaware, were moved through this region during Indian removal efforts to make way for white settlers. It's important to acknowledge this, since the land that serves as the foundation of this institution was, and still is, stolen land.
We remember these truths because K-State's status as a land-grant institution is a story that exists within ongoing settler colonialism, and rests on the dispossession of indigenous peoples and nations from their lands. These truths are often invisible to many. The recognition that K-State's history begins and continues through indigenous contexts is essential.
Please remember
These truths,
because we still remember.
Thank you. My name is Don Saucier. I'm the Faculty Associate Director of the Teaching and Learning Center. I'm very excited that all of you are here today. We have a number of people who will contribute today because today is a chat. Last week, our first event was more of a PowerPoint presentation on achieving and sustaining excellence in teaching. If you didn't get to see that, we archive all of our events on the TLC webpage, so you can check that out. I do want to let you know that this series meets every week over Zoom. So if you found us today, that same Zoom link will get you in next week and the week after and the week after. And we have an amazing schedule set up for the fall semester. We're finalizing our schedule for the spring. So we're very excited. You have the opportunity to earn a professional development certificate or even fellow status at the Teaching and Learning Center. And my colleagues have just dropped that link into the chat if you want to check that out. And these will include going to a number of events, doing post-event surveys, doing a reaction at the end, and a couple of other things if you want to be a fellow. But I do want to take the time in every meeting to let you know what's coming up next time. And next time we have a great one. We have actually a need to know event. Some of the events in our series are kind of known as need to know because we think anyone who's in teaching needs to be aware of this. And Andy Thompson from our Office of Student Life will be talking about how we can support our students here at K-State. So we're very excited about that for Andy to make time for us next week. I also want to give the opportunity for Andy Faber, who is our new Faculty Institute coordinator serving with Tamara Bauer this semester, to tell us about an event coming up later today.
Yay, thank you. Putting me on the spot, but I love it. So hi, I'm the new Faculty Institute coordinator. I'm working with Tamara Bauer this semester, taking over that position. And so we have our first event of the semester today at 3 p.m. You can join us for a tour of the Manhattan campus. We'll be starting from the Welcome Center and getting to see kind of a student's eye view of the campus, seeing where different departments are located, where students spend their time and whatnot. And we will end at the Student Union Building, where from 4 to 5:30, we have a come and go social event at Union Station by JP's. We'll have some light appetizers and some purple lemonade, and it's going to be fantastic. So we hope to see you there.
That is very exciting. And me and some of the other members of the TLC staff will be sporting our fancy TLC shirts. So we'll be there to meet people and talk about teaching and all the other things here at K-State. So a teaching chat, to kind of let you know, and some of you have been a part of our series before, is a little bit more of an open form session where people can bring concerns and questions, and I'll always have some things to talk about. But this year, we're also going to have kind of what we're calling a primary topic. So we'll have some things that if you come, you'll know we'll talk about that. Today's thing is going to be kind of picking and talking about academic resources for your classes. And we'll get to that in just a little bit. But before we get to that primary topic, I want to find out how people are doing. So there's something that I had learned a long time ago from Tracy Brimhall when the pandemic first kind of hit, called pandemic nicknames. And I'm going to keep using them even when the pandemic's not happening. But pandemic nicknames is your first name is your predominant emotion that you're feeling right now. Your last name is the last food you ate. So what will happen, we're going to do it in terms of a waterfall chat. A waterfall chat, if you're here last week, you realize that you write it in, but you don't hit return until I say go, and then all of it waterfalls into that chat. We can see what people are feeling and what they're into in terms of their last culinary experience. So I'm going to ask that everybody type, but don't hit return yet, their pandemic nickname. Again, first name is the most predominant emotion you're feeling right now. And then your second name, your last name, is going to be the last food that you ate. I'll give you about 5 more seconds. All right, hit return. All right. See how nice that was? And this is something I recommend you can do in your Zoom classes. You can even do this in person by having people going around and doing it. It's a great way to get a temperature check on the group that you're dealing with, see how your students are doing or how your colleagues are doing at the beginning of a class or a meeting. So I had excited chocolate chips. Deborah had peaceful Chipotle. So I'm having a little bit of jealousy right there. You got overwhelmed peach, excited spinach, exhausted plum cod. I don't even know what that is. Stressed pasta, hungry chicken, whelmed biscuit. Is that the right degree of whelmed, like not over or underwhelmed? I don't know what that is. Mixed emotion mushrooms, excitement fig, overwhelmed fig bar, overwhelmed Alfredo, happiness taffy, hyped orange / honey chicken, overwhelmed breakfast burrito, happy PBJ, tired Hotek. I'm not sure what that is. Hopeful granola. What is a plum cod? Someone said, and peaceful burrito. That's a really nice kind of one, a peaceful burrito. And one of the things I'm going to point out is something that is very, very common across the first part of this semester, right? We are in chaos. We're in absolute chaos. And part of that is exciting. Part of that is overwhelming. Part of that is stressful. At least it's something we talk about in some of the Engage to Sage videos that we put out called Excite Nerve. And Noah or Ashley will probably drop that link into the chat if you're interested in that. Oh, a plum cod is a plum plus apricot. Well, that's kind of cool. Excite nerve is the simultaneous feeling of both excitement and anxiety or nervousness. And what we've got to do is kind of figure out how to maximize that. I will recommend that if you don't know where that's coming from, or if it's in the end of the semester and you're asking your students this and everyone says they're anxious or overwhelmed, find out if it's you, find out if it's your class. And maybe there's some things that you can do to support your students through that, because I never want to be the one who is, inappropriately overwhelming my students. I realize there's appropriate levels of challenge and all of those kind of things. But it's a great way to kind of check on your audience. And then you can be jealous of all the awesome food that they're eating that you didn't even know existed. So before we get to our primary topic, I want to give the opportunity for anyone who has kind of an immediate crisis, an immediate concern, something that they want to crowdsource an answer to. And you can put it in the chat. If you put it in the chat, I'll read it out loud for you. If you want to say it out loud, you can unmute and talk. But if anyone has any crisis, concern, question, something just need to share, now would be your time.
So I have one thing.
Awesome.
I have a student in my class who I know identifies as non-binary, and I have 2 students in my class who came up to me after class last week. It's just a once-a-week class, and they had a question related to their English class. It's a CAT community, so I'm not the teacher for that. Long story short, there's a paper they write in that class that relates to gender identities, and so they shared with me their beliefs about genders and their beliefs in binaries. So I know this information. I don't think anyone's trying to be hurtful or anyone has been hurt, but I know that this dynamic exists. I'm always aware it's possible that it exists, whether I know that it exists or not, but I am aware that one of my students' identities, basically 2 other students just don't believe it's a real thing. So I just kind of have an eye out on that, but I would love to hear feedback for people navigating those tricky waters when you have students that you know for sure have different beliefs and different identities that others don't believe. So my main concern is for my student who identifies as non-binary, that they know they are accepted and welcomed, but I can't control how other students, what they may say or what they may do. So pretty open question, but if anyone has experience or thoughts on that, I would love to hear your insights.
I would love to hear the insights too, and I'll kind of begin by saying that when people raise questions or concerns like this, you know, I'm often struck by, I want to be able to say, oh, this is what we do to fix that situation. It's almost never that easy. None of the crises or concerns that people are going to bring up in here say, oh, just fix that, and then everybody is going to be happy and learn well and all of those kinds of things. So if people have insights, factors to consider on this, that's great to share, even if you don't know the answer to the question.
I definitely don't have an answer, but in my pedagogy class yesterday, I had my students read the first chapter, the introductory chapter of Bell Hooks' Teaching to Transgress, which I highly recommend that book to everyone. But it reminded me of something that she says, that the classroom environment that you create, the energy that's there, is everyone's responsibility, not just the teachers. And I think that this is a place where this extends. I always tell my students, and I have a statement in the syllabus that says that it's their responsibility to bring respect and positive energy to the classroom, and that this is something that everyone is responsible for contributing to a positive class environment. And so I think that you could just kind of remind your students that their responsibility is to be respectful and bring a positive attitude to the class. And then if someone doesn't, you can have a talk with them about, like, this is, you know, we want to be respectful. It's okay. You're allowed your personal beliefs. That's fine. But that doesn't mean that you can treat someone with disrespect, because that affects the learning environment.
And Andy, I love how you kind of put that in terms of creating a learning environment outside of this particular situation that would cover things beyond this particular situation. What other thoughts do people have? Because this is an issue that many of us may be uncomfortable with. There's a lot of different understandings. There's a lot of different experiences. We may be unable to truly empathize with some of the situations that are going on here, even though we try to sympathize. So what kind of other thoughts or reactions or factors do you think we've been considering to make sure that our students are all respected and all safe in our learning spaces?
I had another idea, and I don't know if it's too late in the semester in your class for this, but actually having a class discussion about it, and not necessarily pinpointing why you wanted that discussion, but just to say, so we're all on the same page. Let's talk about what respect is. And it could even be like not super serious, because like I'm thinking, I use Mentimeter in my class a lot, and asking people for ideas of what respect looks like in a classroom. And you can always add your own idea, like, oh, treating everyone with respect means using the name or the title that people want to use in class. And then you can give your own example, like, I want to be Dr. Glazer or whatever, something like that. So it's not necessarily obvious for the one student in class, you're not pointing them out, but you're also talking about the issue that you think might come up.
So Melissa, in terms of the setup of your class, do you think you're going to have conversations? I know you mentioned the paper, but conversations within the class where this might become a little bit more of a conflict than it could be otherwise?
Yeah, great question. So what's unique about this situation is that it's a CAT community. So in my direct class, which is once a week on Thursdays, I don't think so. But the same 15 students in my class are in English 100 together 3 times a week. And so there may be things that go on in that class, and they have a wonderful professor, and he and I chatted about this, and we're both aware of everything. So I have full confidence that he will have a great environment for all those students in his class. But it's the same students. So whatever happens in that other class, I may or may not be aware of. And since there's just 15 of them, that dynamic, and since it's a community and belonging and everything, knowing how that happens in their other class is important. I mean, and I'll communicate with the professor and he'll let me know, if he notices anything. The third class they have together is sociology. So it's like 200 or 300 students. So I don't think that dynamic will even be an issue. And it hasn't been an issue so far. It's just been, I am aware of kind of these potential things. Does that answer your question?
It does. And by
Okay.
the way, I come from a discipline where we can't say the word prove, right? We can never say anything with 100% certainty, but the closest we've ever gotten is saying that prevention is better than intervention. So I think getting out in front of this is definitely going to be better than waiting for something to blow up, especially in that smaller class where creating those communication skills and opportunities is going to be more of what you do.
Yeah.
I do think, setting those guidelines, expectations for interaction, as Andy had kind of talked about, I think talking about the importance of empathy, which is if I was going to make the world a better place, I would make everyone more empathetic. Those kind of things would be, things I would hope would help out our students.
Yeah.
One of the things
I agree. I appreciate what you said, Andy and Clarissa. I think those are really, really helpful things to do, because my anticipation is either nothing happens or it's just an undercurrent or it's a microaggression. I don't know the students well enough yet because I've only had them for class once, but I don't anticipate anything confrontational, but it's just more those undertones. And if a student feels on the outskirts or somebody says something to a neighbor and they don't realize it gets overheard, that kind of thing.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us, even though I don't know that we fixed it. Does anyone else have a question or concern, a crisis, or something they'd like to share at this point before we get to our primary topic? How is teaching going so far? Yeah, and a couple of the ambiguous nods. Normally it's about mid-semester before we get the ambiguous knobs. So y'all are in mid-semester form. This is great. I will say for myself, because of some of the responsibilities I had at the university, I did not teach my general psychology class last year. Noah actually stepped in and taught it for me and did an amazing job. My class is predominantly first-year students, and they are amazing. It's amazing to see the energy of students first coming to college. And that has been really kind of heartening for me to see them really they asked yesterday like 1,000 questions about the peer review process. It's something that I was kind of talking about almost in passing as I was talking about the scientific method, and they had so many questions about that. It was so, I don't mean to sound trivializing, but adorable, to kind of see that wonderful curiosity about something they'd never heard about. Well, that's how journal articles happen. So that's been really kind of cool. And I think anytime we can find those little nuggets of fulfillment and validation and joy, that's what gets us through the other crises that are coming our way later this semester in some shape or form. All right, our topic for today, and this was the event surveys you do and the end of the semester surveys you do, we read them. And one of the things that people ask is they wanted to spend more time talking about this topic in particular. Some of the other teaching chats are similarly inspired. They want to talk about how to choose course materials. Now, ideally, we'd have done this before the semester started, but our PD series doesn't start until the semester starts, so we're doing it now. And there may be the opportunity for you to take some of the lessons or ideas from your colleagues and implement them now in your semester, or this might be something to hold on to for the future. But I'm just going to put out the very broad question: what are some factors to consider when you're choosing your course materials? And again, you can drop in the chat, you can unmute and say it out loud, whatever's comfortable for you.
I think the big thing for me is well, it's like a 2-point thing, is starting with materials that are accessible to students is key. It needs to be stuff that, like, there's a lot of really great articles out there that I'm like, this is all going to go way over my students' heads. If I was going to get to this, it would have to be something that I would build to. So make sure that you're starting from kind of where your students are at. And then the other thing would be find stuff that you're passionate about. So I have long had a policy that I don't teach anything that I'm not excited about. I have to find a way to get excited about it, or I do not teach it. And fortunately, I can get excited about a lot of things. So maybe that might just be a me thing, but I think
You know,
that those are the two keys.
You know, Andy, I don't think that's just a just you thing. I think it is a you thing, but I don't think it's a just you thing. And that's actually one of the recommendations I made last week about sustaining excellence in teaching is it's got to be about you and your enjoyment at some level. I love your idea about not going over your students' heads. I think sometimes, and I'm thinking about things that I've done, and I'll tell you about the first time I taught a CAT community. Melissa mentioned a CAT community a little bit earlier today. A CAT community is a connections course for first-time college students that they're taking these 2 big intro classes, and then they have this small connections class on more of a special topic that they can develop some community, learn how to college, get to use their voices, those kinds of things. The first year, I was one of the first people to teach a CAT community. I treated it like a graduate seminar. So I had them reading primary sources. I had them coming in talking high-level theory and all of that. And it bombed. It did not go well at all. And thank God Greg Eislein believed in me enough to give me a second chance, because this next year I came in and I did things completely differently. Now, actually, what I do for readings in that class is I write their readings. I write a single-space 1-page reading of my understanding of what it is I want them to know about it, make it accessible, but boldface terms and all of that, so that I know exactly what they know for their conversation. They're not missing stuff. It's easy to kind of understand. They're seeing the connections. And then we have wonderful discussions from that. Now, obviously, the downside of this is I have to write their readings. So it's something that, when you're choosing materials, a couple people mentioned cost. These are free, right? And I'm a huge fan of free resources. But cost, accessibility, and also what it's going to take for you to use that resource in your class, not only in terms of its creation necessarily, but do you have to read it? Do you have to watch the resources? Do you have to manage the resources? These are other factors that I want us to think about and considering. What other factors should we be considering?
I guess one thing that I think about, and this is because these are the classes I teach, is I have survey classes where we have a course description with lots of topics I have to cover for sure. So I usually have a textbook that covers them because I'm not an expert on all of them. And honestly, I don't want to do the research or write a 1-page on every one of these. But then I make sure that they're really cheap for my students if I'm going to do that, and that there's some tool to help them study, like a quiz feature or something where they can keep studying the material. And because I know they're probably not going to read the book, honestly, but that way then they're at least have something that will help them for the test, because I write the test myself. And that they actually learned how to use that tool. And this semester, what I did last week on Thursday in my classes, both of them, we went through the student resources online, the academic resources. There's like pages about how to study, and they learned about different ways that you can study, and they're all going to try that. And I'm trying to incorporate the study tools we have with our textbook with the ways that they've learned about how to study better, or how to take better notes, and hoping to integrate those two together so that they can see the textbook isn't just there to give them topics, but it actually has some tools and some resources that will help them study better in the ways that they learned that you can study better last week.
So you brought up 2 things. You brought up textbooks, and I want to talk more about textbooks a little bit later, because I think deciding what textbook is appropriate for a class is going to require a little bit of our time. But the other thing you brought up, which I think is really cool, and I do these in my classes too, is having those supplemental resources that are helping your students succeed in your class. So where are some places that we can find some of these supplemental resources? We'll come back to that textbook question in a little bit, but where can we find some supplemental resources that are going to help our students succeed in our classes?
So I put this in the chat, but it's not really like finding a supplemental resource, but I think just explaining to your students why you're giving them the reading that you're giving them and what to prepare for class. I do this, I always give like a reading guide with everything that I assign to my students that explains, okay, what is this? Why am I assigning it? And what we're going to be doing in the next class, so that they have an idea. Part of it is so that it's a shortcut, because that there's students that don't always have time to do the reading. But if they can at least hit the main points, if they can skim the reading and say, like, oh, we're going to talk about this topic tomorrow, and find the key information, they're going to be way more prepared than if they just go, I don't have time I'm just not going to do anything. So I think that giving them that, like, what you want them to prepare for class can be huge. It doesn't take very long to write those little things for each class. And once I have a class prepared, then you just use them semester after semester. And that can be a big help for students.
I have to jump in and like applaud that. I love that. As an instructional designer too, I try to ask the instructor, what is the point of this content? Why are you providing it? And a lot of times in courses, we just see a lot of links. We just see, links to articles, links to YouTubes and stuff. And logistically too, if you can kind of put those things onto a page and put, just a paragraph, like a general overview of what this is about, why we're doing it, like you said, connect it to your learning objectives, and maybe even give them some focus questions, those kinds of things. And students they're not going to know if they need to deeply read something, if they need to skim something. So all those kind of details are super helpful. So thank you.
Yeah, I noticed that because I would sometimes have students that, I'd give them a little bit longer of a reading and they'd feel like they needed to really memorize the whole thing. And I'm like, no, I just want you to get the main ideas. And then I started realizing I should just say this. If it's something that, sometimes I give them shorter readings and I'm like, I want you to read this twice. The first time I want you to just highlight main ideas. The second time I want you to think about how this applies, or, something like that. But giving them specific things of how to read it, because I think most students don't even have a concept that there are different ways of reading. And so kind of highlighting that it's no, you can skim this one. I'm not expecting you to deep read it, just skim it and get some good ideas.
And Andy, what you're doing too is you're providing tangible evidence of your commitment to supporting your student success, right? You are doing these things, it's extra work for you. And even if you recycle it, from semester to semester, it's extra work for you that's actually set up to help your students. And I think this is really important, that we set up this expectation that our students see us as someone who's facilitating their learning and success, not someone who's an adversary to that learning and success. And this is a really nice way to do that. Yeah, and if anyone, I'm getting kind of some private chats that people have to go. I completely understand you have other things going on in your lives. We archive this for later. You can check in on it later. I just thank you for being here for any of our time. So thank you for that. And for those of you who do need to leave to go teach 12:30 classes or something, it's great to see you. One other thing about the supplemental resources, and I create documents for this, I do videos for this in my class. I'll just call the video "How to Succeed in My Class," or something like that, and I'll give them tips. We made one last week at our Engage stage that's kind of more general, like how to succeed in college classes, for students to kind of watch. And if that's helpful for you to show to your students, feel free to do that. But I think letting them know that these resources exist to drive your education, not to create busy work. And then Andy's talking about explicitly connecting it to the work so that it's not busy work, is something that our students will appreciate. I know definitely as a student, when someone tells me why I should do something, I am more likely to do that. Even if I don't understand or completely agree with the reason, the fact that the instructor gave me a reason is often enough to convince me maybe I should engage in that.
I do have one more thing that
Yeah.
with when I have students do assignments to prepare for class discussions, is that I let them submit their preparation work in whatever format they want. And so I say, you can, I give them a Word document with the questions. I say, you can use this Word document, you can print it out, you can write on it, you can write in a notebook, you can take a picture and submit the picture. I tell them to think about the way that they learn best. And if they learn best by writing, handwrite it. And if they learn best by typing, that they should do that. If they're auditory learners, or they do well processing out loud, I'm submit a voice memo. That's fine, so telling them to think about the way that they learn and then prepare in that way, then they know oh, okay, this is actually for me to learn, not to do things. I don't want to do things just to please my professor, or just because this is the way that I want them to be lifelong learners and think about what that looks like to them.
I love that. I want to point out that people are engaging in the chat. So if any of you are kind of wondering what's going on over there, Melissa talks about not doing it for all classes, but choosing materials later in the semester to kind of fit students' needs and interests. One of the things you can do is you can say, and I do this in my classes, I'll have TBD readings, right? So I'll let you know later what it is we're going to be reading, and then you can kind of adapt and be a little bit more flexible. One of the things Melissa mentions in the chat is that after a little while, she builds a bank. And then what you can do is you can pick the one of the several that you've already kind of vetted or used before that's going to best fit for this topic or this cohort. So that's something you can definitely do. We don't have to have everything planned out on that first week of the semester. We can have the structure planned out and fill in the details a lot later. So I really do appreciate bringing that up. Melissa also mentioned using different media like TED Talks and those kind of things. It doesn't always have to be a reading to kind of expand that student's knowledge base. Clarissa also very helpfully provided a website for some student access tools to help them be successful in our class. So you don't have to invent everything. There are some toolkits and things like that out there that you can sample from to help your students. So thank you all for including that additional information in the chat. I want to circle back to textbooks a little bit. So one of the things that, you know, my stereotype of the college class, right, when I was coming out of undergraduate decades ago, was that the college professor would know everything. I soon learned that's not true, right? The college professor knows everything. They're going to assign a textbook. There's always got to be a textbook. They're going to have lectures that may or may not be, right, sage on the stage, right? They're going to may or may not relate to the textbook. And then there's going to be an exam that follows where I have to memorize all the stuff in the textbook. Like that's kind of what I thought college education was from many of my own undergraduate experiences. The textbook, do we need one? It's good to see you, LB. How you doing? Do we need a textbook in our classes? What do we think? All right, Clarissa said it depends. I'm a psychologist. It depends is always the right answer, right? There's so many other factors and dependencies that kind of go into those decisions. I think if we're not going to have a textbook, for some of those students that had that initial stereotype of college education that I had, sometimes they get a little bit nervous. So what can we do about our course materials, particularly when we don't have a textbook, to help our students know it's not just, you know, you're going to read chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4. And in class, I'm not reading the textbook to you, because I have students who have asked me in class, or raised their hand and said, what page are you on? Like, I have no idea what you mean by that question. It's like, oh, I just thought you were going through the textbook. No, that's not what we're doing at all. But there are some expectations where, especially first generation students, first time college students, they may have no idea what it is we're doing or how a textbook even relates.
Okay, I just opened up my my mic. So I'll tell you what I do. I tell them that there is no textbook, but I give them, when I give them assignments, I give them a specific reading that includes the core of a chapter in that book. And then I say to them, but you are free to find any other resource. So I want them to be responsible for their own learning. And I give them also chapters or articles that come out of the web. And I also give them films that they could look at, but I give them the freedom to find those anywhere else that they want to, but they at least cover the content in what would have been the textbook. So it gives them both some foundation in terms of the content that I want to see in their own presentation and discussion, but it also gives them freedom to understand it enough to go find something else.
So Clarissa raises an amazing point, says, assume they don't read the textbook and potentially then don't come in having done that. In my Gen Psych class, you know, I have first year, first time college students, many first generation students. So we kind of talked about the textbook for a while on that first day of class. And I'll kind of let you know what my textbook is and kind of how I made the choices, but I also make all of this transparent to them. So in teaching general psychology, I found that there were two options that I could have gone. Obviously, there's a multitude of other options, but two options. One is the state-of-the-art, most popular textbook in our field, which runs about $280 for the cost of the student. The other is something called the NOVA project, which is an open source textbook that each chapter is written by a specialist in that area. So we don't have, just one author across all of them. They're written by specialists. It's free. It's got a Creative Commons license. They can share it on the social media. They can do anything they want with it. But each chapter is written in a different voice. It looks like a Word document, so it's really long. The 1,200 page version of the book is actually probably only 300 textbook pages, but it looks really long. The format is inconsistent. People set up their chapters with different kinds of headings. They have different things at the end, whether they have learning questions or not. So it's a very ugly, very inconsistent textbook with arguably better information than is in the more expensive, beautiful textbook with lots of pictures and visuals. And I'll tell them, I have to make this decision. Do I do 280, beautiful and wonderful, or I do free, kind of disjointed and frustrating, but somehow even a little bit better information? And tell them my decision is I went free and disjointed. And I asked them, what do you wish I had chosen? And it appears 100%. I don't count all the hands, right? But it appears 100% want me to have made that choice. The end of the semester, I always query my students. I said, all right, now that you've dealt with this textbook, tell me what you think. And they always tell me they hated that there were different voices. They hated there were different authors. They hated all this, but definitely use this one again next semester. And I share that with my students because what I want them to know is I know that this is not perfect. And I wanted them to be aware of the factors that I considered in making that choice. And then I also let them know how I'm going to be using it. So for instance, in that class, on the exams, 80% of the questions come from me. I use the textbook to supplement me. And then 20% of the questions will come from the textbook of stuff I haven't taught. So I'll even let them know kind of the numerical percentage of how I'm going to be using that resource. And these are things that I think we should be a little bit more comfortable doing, is letting our students know how we came to the decision and how the textbook is going to impact them, combined with recommendations for their success. I'll tell them, you should be spending about 80% of your study time on lecture notes. 20% will be spent on the textbook about stuff I haven't talked about in class. And I think that works, pretty well for my students. I don't think it's perfect, but I think it's rare. My students say, my other teachers don't tell me, how to use the textbook or how they chose the textbook. They just say, buy it and read these chapters. I think we can let our students behind the scenes a little bit more to invite them to be collaborators in their learning.
So,
I love that.
Go ahead.
Sorry. I love that
go ahead.
because I think that, it's really important for students to see that we're thinking about what we're assigning and that we're thinking about how they interact with it. And we're thinking about factors beyond just the material. Like we're thinking about, okay, what is the material that we want them to learn, but also thinking about the price, thinking about, all kinds of, how heavy it is and if they're going to have to be lugging it around or if they have easy digital access. The more that we make these kinds of these decisions that we're making apparent to our students and allowing them to present their voices. One, I think that pedagogically, you're demonstrating that their voice matters, and that's going to lead to better discussions just in general. So I think that that's great. But you also show that, like, okay, so I have the same thing. I use an open educational resource in one of my classes, and I'm like, it's not great, but it is free. And if you find errors, let me know because it's my open educational resource. So I'm like, I can change it. If there's a chapter that you don't like, let me know, because if you all hate a specific chapter, maybe I'll revise it in the next version. So showing students that they have a say in their own education is so important.
So Andy, would you be willing to, and I don't know if you did it through the initiative, but did you do it through our open textbook initiative? Would you be willing to give an overview of how K-State supports that?
Yeah, so if you don't know, K-State has an open alternative textbook education initiative that you can apply for. I don't remember off the top of my head what the application dates are, but you write out, like, this is the course that I'm teaching, this is what I propose to create for my students. So before, my students in this course had a pretty expensive textbook that they used that was pretty impersonal, and I wasn't a big fan of it. And I mean, it was fine, it had good information, but I wanted the course to be more for our students specifically. And so I teach Spanish. Oh, thanks for adding the dates. I teach Spanish, and I wanted my students to see how Spanish exists in the Great Plains region and affects their lives. And so I applied for this grant and got some funding to support me in creating these materials. I piloted them first with PDFs for a year, and then once I had felt pretty good about the materials, I put them up on Pressbooks, which the library has a subscription to, so you can create your own Pressbooks and have a digital book for your students.
Andy,
I had a
thank you for
question for
providing
Don.
that. And Scott, thank you for providing the details there. I do want to make one point before I forget. I see Scott's hand. I know LB has a comment. One of the biggest complaints we get from students is that they get these resources, but then they're not used in classes. And in particular, those complaints come up when we're dealing with like academic technology, like clickers or Top Hat or something like that, to the extent that our Student Governing Association actually created a resolution telling us to knock it off. Because people were requiring their students to buy things that they weren't actually then using in their classes. So if you're going to have a resource, and hopefully this goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway, if you have a resource, it should be part of your class in some capacity that your students know about. Scott, I see your hand, and then LB, I want to give you your opportunity to also speak.
I just wanted to piggyback on what Andy said and give people a resource. So to your point, the library has a license with Pressbooks, and they currently have a limited license, but they're trying to show that there are faculty that are willing to use it and be able to expand that license. Carolyn Jackson is the person in the library to reach out to if you'd like to consider using that Pressbooks resource to take out your to put out some of your OER. And then on the other side, we are actively enabling the LibreText Adapt platform in Canvas. That's the one Brian Linshield uses, and I would invite you to reach out to Brian Linshield directly. That is a free to use resource. We're not license limited. Anyone could be using it. And they are expanding the integrations with Canvas to ultimately include grade pass back for the assessments that happen in there, etc. So there are two options at K-State that you can get involved in directly that give you the resources and tools to build some rich OER resources, either through the library, which agreed, as Andy's saying, they're really ready to help. And so is, Brian's obviously got another load, but he's really interested in helping people get started on using LibreText Adapt, which is very similar to Pressbooks as a publishing and organizing platform of your content. Thank you.
I want to take the opportunity to amplify something that should become obvious that in the conversation we just had, but also Andy pointed out in the chat, that we have amazing support people on campus, right? The library, people at Global Campus, our instructional designers, some of them are here, people like Scott Finkeldye, I was just telling you about some stuff, Trina McCarty, Deborah Goins on this meeting. These are people who help us with the setup of these resources, set up our Canvas pages, thinking innovatively about teaching. So we have amazing support for these kind of things all over campus. And if you ever kind of have some of these questions, you don't know where to go, if you contact TLC, if we don't know the answer, we'll put you in contact with people on our campus who do. So I just want to make sure that everybody is aware of that. We're part of your professional network and support system now. LB, you had something like 10 minutes ago, and I apologize for only coming back to you now.
It's okay. No, it's fine. I think, though, that we need to also factor in the fact that when we talk about these issues of student learning, there is a difference between undergraduate students, especially first-year students, and graduate students. And first-year students who have a book in our college that we believe is the Bible, and I'll tell you why we say that, but that I don't particularly like the way we use the book, in that there's always reading chapters. And at one time, we required them to take notes and submit those notes. And to me, that's just a robotic way of saying, oh, I've looked at the material and proof that I've looked at the material. And I think we can engage our students better with the book. For instance, when we introduce definitions, I have them look through the book themselves and find the definition and draw a drawing that is not in the same place where the definition is. Therefore, they have to look through the book to find other places that describe and show me that they understand that definition. And I find that is a sneaky way to get them to first understand how the book is organized and what information generally is available in the book, as opposed to reading specific chapters for projects that if they don't read it, they still haven't cracked that book. And I just find that to be a bit elementary. So I bring that up as giving the students some freedom to explore the book without forcing them to do a specific, very contrived thing, especially for that young age group where you want them to discover what exists in the book, period. Otherwise, the book never gets opened.
And LBM, I'm constantly impressed by your efforts to empower your students to take some ownership and collaboration in their own learning. That is amazing. I want to shift gears back to something that kind of was put out in the chat a little bit ago, and this has to do with AI generation, ChatGPT. Someone had kind of asked about, is anyone using some ChatGPT or AI generated resources? Before we get to that, I want to put that question out. But while you're thinking, there's a ChatGPT week that's going to be happening. I'm going to drop into the chat a link to kind of how that week is starting to unfold. There's starting to be some events built, some speakers brought in, not only from campus, but from outside of our campus. The TLC in particular will be having an event called Artificial Intelligence in Higher Ed, which will be presented by Clarissa Steele, who actually brought up the ChatGPT situation over in our chat. So we're very excited about that. And Clarissa, you had mentioned something about using some prompts in your class a little bit ago. I and a couple of people in the chat think that's intriguing. I was wondering if you'd be comfortable sharing.
Yeah, and I actually, if you want, I can share the PowerPoint I use with my students. I shared it with Melissa. I just wanted
if you send it to us, we'll post it next to this recording on the TLC website.
Sure. And this will actually be related to what I do in October as well, because I have resources with even longer, better prompts that Ethan Mollick has made that are way better than the stuff I used in class yesterday. We were just getting used to AI, but I had them look up things like, we're going to learn this concept in class. You haven't learned it yet. See what AI tells you about it. And let's talk about what it's giving you. And did you write better prompts to get more information if you didn't know what it was? They wrote a cover letter in class, although when I tried to do it, AI wouldn't do it. And I was like, well, this also happens. So let's talk about how we get around AI not doing things because it doesn't want to. We just did a few, and then I'm imagining in class throughout the semester, as we're going through topics, even tomorrow in class, I'll have them use AI as a prompt or prompt AI to look at something. And then I'm actually hoping that I can show them how to use the textbook to check what AI is giving them to make sure it's correct information as well. So I'm hoping that's another way that they can use the textbook that they're buying for my class, and figuring out how to use it when they're studying, because I'm afraid they're going to use AI only and then never look at actual resources that are checked and verified instead of, AI, which may or may not be garbage that's coming out for them. So yeah, I will upload that PowerPoint now.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate that, Clarissa. Is anyone else using AI and Incapacity for course room materials? Yes, Brandon, would you be willing to share?
Sure. In similar way, the way I'm using it currently in class and encouraging students to use it is to just deepen their thinking. So I've had a historical reflection and application assignment that I do at the end of each chapter, where I ask them to, in a discussion board, reflect on what stood out to them in that chapter and how they would apply it in their future career. I've now supplemented that assignment and said, after you've written what came to mind first, here's a prompt I want you to copy and paste into ChatGPT, because I found that ChatGPT knew my book that I was using. And there's a little part in that prompt where they have to personalize it. So it's like, can you provide for a student who's studying in finance who wants to be an auditor? That's the part that they can customize. How they might apply the principles from chapter 2 of XYZ book, and hit enter. And then ChatGPT will usually give 5 to 10 very specific scenarios how a student who's being an auditor is going to be able to apply those principles in their career. And it just helps them think a little bit further than what they would do.
I love that. I love that. I think when ChatGPT first came out, everyone was like, wow, this is evil. And then we started to think a little bit more creatively about how it could actually be used to do some good. And also continually amazed at Brandon's ability to do that. Brandon actually, at one of our events last year when this came up, he had it write a song or a poem about teaching from the voice of Dr. Seuss. And I think it was a pretty fun moment for me in the PD series last year. So Brandon, thank you as always for sharing. Oh, go ahead. Yes.
One more of how it's helping me in preparing teaching lessons. So like this morning, I'm teaching a new course this semester. So it's kind of new book, new topics, new slide deck. And the slide deck it had all the concepts and principles, but it really just wasn't very good at connecting it to real life. And so I fed ChatGPT a bit of the information about the chapter, about what was on the slides. And I said, can you suggest a real company or industry, and then talk about how each of these concepts would apply to these slides? And it sput out, and it took me some time to kind of create the prompt and tell, here's the different slides. And it spat out like Tesla and gave a real good example of Tesla. I said, okay, that's good. But can you do another one of a company that's specifically here in the Midwest that might be a bit more relatable, preferably based in Kansas? And it gave me an example of Cargill, which coincidentally was the guest lecture I'd had on Friday was from Cargill. It was perfect. And it helped me then weave a story of how these concepts were applying at real businesses into my lecture that I probably could have done on my own, but it sure saved me a heck of an amount of time.
Excellent. Thank you, Brandon. So we are nearly out of time. So I want to kind of give the opportunity for anyone who has any questions about either selecting course materials or about anything else teaching related at this point. I want to give people the opportunity to do that. So any questions? Or ideas that you've been wanting to share and haven't had that opportunity yet? So to conclude our kind of primary topic, one of the things I do want to kind of put out there is you don't always need to use the same material semester to semester. I realized last week, I said, once you kind of found a philosophy that works for you, try to implement it. But I also talked about adopting and adjusting. So if you find something is not working, more power to you. Move to something better. And I tend to aim more towards streamlining my resources and assignments and all of those kind of things. So more is not always better when it comes to kind of putting resources out there for your students. If you put out lots and lots of stuff, you run the risk of letting them know that they can't do everything. And sometimes what that does is, well, if they can't do everything, maybe I won't do anything. So just kind of, I think I would err on having a more manageable number of resources that they will actually interact with than too many for them to do anything with. So that's kind of a couple of final recommendations that I would make in the flow of our conversation. We are about out of time, so I'll end with some announcements. Number one, thank you for being at our TLC Professional Development Series this week. We're going to drop the post-event survey into the chat. Please do that, especially if you're looking to, have your opinion shape our series in the future, or want to earn a professional development certificate or become a TLC fellow. Next week, Andy Thompson is going to be visiting from the Office of Student Life to tell us about supporting our students here at K-State. We have a new Faculty Institute event a little bit later today. Andy still here? Andy dropped off. There's going to be a tour of our campus at 3, and then a social hour at JP's starting at 4. That's the Union JP's starting at 4, where me and some of the other members of the TLC staff will be along with Tamara Bauer and Andy Faber, who are the coordinators for the new Faculty Institute. It's a wonderful series, and hopefully we can see you there a little bit. And I think that is everything. If anyone has any questions, please stick around for a second. I'll be happy to chat with you. Otherwise, hopefully we'll see you next week when Andy Thompson comes and talks to us. But thank you for taking some time today, and I hope your semester is going great.